Hello and welcome to the next episode of Two Girls Talk Transits. Today we're reviewing the astrology from May 4th through May 10th, 2025. And I'm Maddie. I'm alone today as Kaleigh was unable to make this one, but this is a short week. So we're going to knock it out pretty quick. It's another kind of week, just like last week, where we're transitioning. We're getting into the more Aries energy, actually, with Venus in Aries. And we are also getting a touch of Taurus season when Mercury enters Taurus at the end of the week. So another softer week, which is good because the latter half of May is just really more intense. And I know we are still feeling the effects of the Mars-Pluto opposition, which there were a lot of news stories that I was hoping to cover with Kaleigh, but maybe we'll touch on it next week when we're back together. Most notably was the Pope passing away on that Mars Pluto opposition, or actually their funeral was on the exact Mars Pluto opposition. This one was interesting because the Pope is a Cancer rising. And so Mars has been, retrograde and traveling through his first house. And there was a lot of sickness and illness. I think previously he was in the hospital like a month with pneumonia. And then, as Mars kind of right when Mars was leaving that sign, there was this like lunar aspect that seemed to like spark it. And then, that Mars Pluto is just right there on that cusp of Cancer and Leo, and right in the bit of Leo, and really was kind of just a show of like what Mars can do in your first house, especially if you have a day chart and it's a more challenging planet. A lot of the affliction and pain from Mars. But there were also other things, notably like the India and Pakistan kind of disagreements and kind of conflict that's brewing on the border. So we'll talk more about that a little bit next week, and we can look at this more in depth. But for this week, we have our first planetary station. Well, right now, all the planets have been direct, and I talked about that before. And Pluto is going to be the first one to station retrograde here on Sunday, May 4th. And, this is a much more outer planet. The outer planet station retrograde every 6 months or so. So they're nothing that's uncommon. But you can see in this entire chart, Pluto's the only sign that's now turned red, or it's red in its display. So that is because it's showing that it's moving backwards. So Pluto will retrograde pretty far back as like a couple degrees, about 0 or 1 degree of Aquarius. So it's just going to be really slow moving period of time. But the main signature that this means is we are now going to get a review of a lot of the Plutonian themes that have shown up with Pluto and Aquarius. And this is things like how we are taking in power or control in society and these new standards of power and control in our society. We've seen a lot, especially from the United States lens, a change in new rules and new restrictions and new laws about things like your identity or how society is functioning. We've had a lot of organizations that have helped the collective. So things like the Consumer Right Bureau, which is used to help people deal against like spam or fraud in companies, that has been dismantled. The Department of Education has been dismantled, or at least significantly drawn back. So I think Pluto stationing retrograde is kind of going to be a bit of a challenge or review, or sort of like, okay, all these power decisions have been made, and now we're going to be looking back at them, reviewing them, backtracking, and saying, are these decisions that we want to make? Are these tariffs that we want to keep? Are this dismantling of these funds and services that help collective needs something that we want to continue to do? The odds are that it's definitely going to get challenged. And I think the Mars-Pluto opposition was sort of the precursor to this retrograde now. And, just whenever a planet goes retrograde, we're going to notice it more. And we also have aspects to Pluto this week. So I think it's going to be a big theme of like challenging power dynamics. For you personally, you want to look to Aquarius and, reflect on the last 6 or so months that Pluto has been in Aquarius. What has been like an intense thing going on, or like an area of your life that has been feeling more power, more control kind of coming up, or where there's just been an intense amount of energy. As I talked about on one of the last podcasts, Pluto tends to make really small things really big. And that can be a thing in your area of a chart. Like if you don't have a lot of planets in Aquarius, or if you have nothing in Aquarius like me, that can be this notion of like really making that sign and that house very more loud and intense and kind of being brought up all these issues going on. So just want to reflect on that. And now there's going to be a review of that. And, it can be again other people in your life, but it can also be you. When Pluto was going through Capricorn in my sixth house, and like in this example, I was just meeting or having interactions with a lot of really intense bosses and people who wanted a lot of control in the workplace and having to work under them. The sixth house is often a place of servitude and how you're in service to others. And that was like a big thing with Pluto and Capricorn. Pluto and Aquarius has brought a lot of intense awareness into my relationships. Not necessarily that they have power and control over me, but I may just also not know that at this time. But just a big focus, like that magnifying glass being put on that area of your life. And I think you're going to feel that this week. Wherever Aquarius is in your chart is an area you want to be mindful of, because there are some aspects, and we are also looking at the stationing, which is going to heighten this planetary involvement. So, I know Kaleigh has Pluto right now in her 10th house of career, and she has been slammed with work. And this week is like one of her busiest work weeks, hence why this recording is done solo. And, it's things like that, coming into a position of power at work or navigating power issues at work. So you just want to reflect on whatever house that Aquarius is for you and where Pluto is at this moment. And that's going to give you kind of the theme for this whole week, because we don't have a lot going on. So that starts off on Sunday on May 4th. Then on the 5th, on Monday, Mercury over in Aries meeting Chiron, but is first going to sextile Jupiter. I really like this aspect overall here, because this is allowing for an expansion of information, of knowledge, and of sharing ideas and kind of growing more, being more problem solving. We are in Taurus season, but I don't think this Taurus season is feeling much like Taurus season, to be honest. Venus, who rules Taurus, is in Aries, and Mercury is over in Aries, and Jupiter is still in Gemini. And so there is a significant element of fire and air, not to mention Mars and Leo. So that's all really active energy and active signs. So it's not the slow, steady pace that we like from Taurus season. And Mercury sextiling Jupiter, though, can be helpful in that sense, as this is a really softer aspect between the two, but Mercury is active with ideas and very creative and really pushing forward. And Jupiter is, expanding mercurial themes. It's in Mercury's rules sign. So Jupiter's expanding our quest for knowledge and information and learning more and problem solving. And these two come together can be like taking action on ideas, or taking action on a creative flow that you have, or really dialing into something that's important to you, or that you had all these thoughts and beliefs and ideas, but really weren't sure how they were going to work out. Chiron is a bit involved. So there may be some places or some discussions about how you were previously wounded through these actions, but for the most part, I think it's a really good day, heightened mental activity, heightened conversations. So, talk with things, talk with people, talk with yourself, journal and write it out, and just notice how you're feeling and what solutions come forward. Jupiter is still in Gemini, but it's moving very, very quickly right now because we're getting ready for Jupiter to change signs. So I like Jupiter when it's direct because it is more efficient and it's taking action. I mean, all planets do better when they're direct, but I feel like Jupiter retrograde in Gemini was a lot of misinformation and a lot of confusing voices trying to get their opinion across, and nobody knew what to believe and what to take faith in. And now Jupiter is justice too. And I hope that there's a lot of discussion about, you know, honoring the due process system in the America and more of that. But Jupiter's still in detriment, but it's moving quickly to its sign of exaltation in Cancer, which we are all looking forward to. And that will be happening in June. So that will be an exciting time for the most part. So anyways, all that to say, really good day for planning any sort of mental activity, any sort of work that you need to just exert a lot of thought power into. Utilize Monday and knock it down, get it done. The moon's also in Leo for the most part, and then it will move into Mercury's rule sign of Virgo. So both of those are very good sort of energies to just be productive. So I hope that's helpful to start your week. And then the next day on Tuesday, May 6th, we get our aspect to Pluto, and it's from Venus. Venus here in Aries, still very close to Neptune. So there's still this very sort of otherworldly, transcendental effect on Venus at this moment, where she is feeling really passionate and spiritual about her desires and maybe a little bit delusional, all that we talked about last week. But Venus here in Aries is going to sextile Pluto, who had just recently stayed in retrograde in Aquarius. So this is again, first on this collective level, I think we're going to kind of revisit a lot of the themes that we had talked about last week with Venus being in Aries. So a lot of things to do with women and women's rights, as well as trans rights, and potentially the laws or the changes or the control and power that has been placed on those individuals and their rights and their freedom. That's very much Pluto, the government kind of stepping in, exerting control. We had this sextile twice before, and this is the third passing. And now that Pluto is retrograde, I would want to be more hopeful and say that a lot of these issues of control and power dynamics placed on these folks are now going to be reviewed and looked at in a different lens, maybe in that backtracking lens, like, hey, maybe we shouldn't have pushed too much on this. Or there can also be, with Venus sextiling Pluto, a collective uprising or collective like action being taken against these laws or control or places of power. So that will be something interesting to just know what sort of comes up about women or trans folks at this time and what's being really brought up in terms of their freedom and self-expression. That's all very Aries sign and Venus in Aries. So we'll get a taste of that, and we'll also get a taste of like, what is Pluto reviewing here? What is Pluto backtracking on? And I'm being hopeful. Pluto can totally go backwards and just re-solidify a lot of things. And Pluto is a very slow aspect, so it's not necessarily something that's going to happen instantaneously. But, we can hope. Then for personal experiences, though, Venus sextiling Pluto, you are again putting that magnifying glass onto the Aquarius part of your chart. And generally, Aries is kind of in a helpful place for Aquarius. There's some sort of relationship, the sextile aspect between those two signs, mean there's a flow, but this can be, relationship or a relationship to the Aquarius part of your chart gets more intense and it gets more prominent in your life. There is a desire and an attraction to that part of your chart to put more energy into it. For example, if this is within my relationships, Venus is in Aries, it can be traveling to go see a friend or making plans to travel, Aries being my ninth house, or just with Venus herself, just wanting that more time, putting more of my energy and effort and time into these one-on-one relationships because Pluto can be kind of intoxicating in that way. Like that's what power is. Power is intoxicating. Power really shows you what it's like to be in that control. And we all sort of love control in some way, even if it's letting go of control. So there can be some sort of really intense desire that comes up with Venus sextiling Pluto, or some kind of really powerful pull or draw to a certain subject or area of your life or person in your life. On the more not so helpful side or negative side, noting that Venus is in detriment and Aries, this can be where you may be really drawn to that part, but then you do get yourself caught into a power issue or control dynamic or something else that's really pulling you back or controlling you or, Plutonian. It can also be secrets and things that are dark or unknown within relationships and embracing that, but maybe potentially burning yourself in some way. The sextile, whenever it's like a flowing energy, like a sextile or trine, it doesn't always necessarily mean it's good. It just means that the planets' energy don't have restraint. When they are in a square or a opposition, there is some sort of tension that's restraining the planetary energy that creates that conflict because the planets can't do what they were designed to set out to do. But when they're in a sextile or a trine aspect, they can be just flowing and just like in this environment of like, oh, I can give you everything. And sometimes that's not necessarily all the good parts of the planet, too. So you can get Venus fighting for something very aggressively or very outspokenly and joining forces with Pluto and implementing a lot of control and power over a situation or a desire or a relationship. So just be mindful. This is starting on Sunday, so you may notice it on Sunday as Venus is moving into that sextile, but it will peak here on Tuesday as to what is coming up in terms of your desires, like what feels kind of intoxicating through your desires. Neptune is very intoxicating too, as a planet of escapism. What is coming up that you feel like you can't avoid? And just notice your interaction with it. Is it too much? Do you just need to be a little mindful of it? Or is it a good balance and maybe you needed to focus on that area of your life? So that is going on. And I just think this aspect will be important too, because like I said, Venus is currently ruling the sun. So it may also impact sort of the Taurus area of your life as well. Wherever Taurus is in your chart, some sort of impact from this Venus sextile Pluto can influence the sun there in Taurus, how you're showing up. If you're distracted by this idea or this person or this attraction, but you're meant to be showing up at work or something, that can be a sort of influence that happens this week. Slight conflict there, just with Venus being in a more tougher sign in Aries. So just things to think about. This is also just subtler energy, so it doesn't necessarily mean that anything has to happen or anything is going to happen. It's just something to note and be aware of as you're feeling throughout the week. So from there, Wednesday, and throughout the week it's quieter, which have moon aspects. Notably, on Wednesday, the moon later in the evening will be opposite Saturn. That's just one aspect I always note each month, as that's generally a time where you feel more limited, you feel more restrained, you feel like you need to get work done, you need to be productive, and it can be good for that. But you can also be very much in a position where you are tired and exhausted and want to, and things are just not working out and you're missing details. And a lot of that is due to the South Node being in Virgo, releasing a lot of energy. So you miss details, you miss the facts, you miss things that are important, and that sometimes comes up. So that can be a little bit tougher energy on Wednesday, May 7th, but just something to note. But then the moon will move into Libra and be interacting with Venus, which is generally sweeter on Thursday. That's a more positive aspect. Still, also interacting with Pluto. So maybe on Thursday you get a taste of the Venus sextile Pluto energy. And Friday will be a little more quieter. You'll have the moon just sort of moving through Libra. And then our last aspect for this week is on Saturday, May 10th, when Mercury enters into Taurus. And the moon will also enter into Scorpio late that evening and be opposite Mercury. So that's going to give you a significant shift in terms of like, okay, Mercury is now in Taurus. So here again, we are increasing Taurus energy, but like I said, it's kind of caveated by the fact that the ruler of Taurus, Venus, is back in Aries and still feeling very martial and feeling very heated. But for the most part, Mercury in Taurus likes softer, subtler communications. It likes to focus on the material realm and how things manifest in that space. It likes comforts or food, or just like, I always laugh whenever I associate Taurus with food. I know some Tauruses don't necessarily agree with me, but I think that's the comfort, it's the steadiness, it's the pleasure of life, and it's having these material aspects to support it. So Mercury in Taurus is generally more softer and slower in its communication than when it's in Aries. And it's good for, again, being more practical. Sometimes Mercury in Aries is very driven, very passionate, and very aggressive with its thoughts and its ideas, that it doesn't see the practicality of every decision, doesn't see how certain decisions are going to impact the reality of our life, right? Like the physical things that we touch, or the real money that we bring in, or the resources that are going to be impacted by certain decisions. So it slows down decision making a little bit, but for the purpose of being able to understand the situation more clearly and be able to take in all accounts of the environment, not just what you feel so passionate about doing. So that's a piece of Mercury and Taurus that we can reflect on and note for. But Mercury is moving very quickly, and in general, it's pretty helpful for Mercury at this moment. It's moving really quickly. It's going to be meeting the sun shortly, and that's going to start to the next restart of the Mercury cycle. So that is good for like mental processing and good for solving things and moving things forward in your mercurial places and your chart. So we will talk more about Mercury and Taurus, but I think you'll notice it just on Saturday, just when the moon starts to enter into Scorpio and is opposite Mercury. And it's just like, oh, yeah, this is what I'm suddenly shifting my mind to. This is what I'm shifting my planning to. This is now what's important for me to focus on at this time. And this is what I'm going to be putting my mental energy into for the next 3 weeks or so. Mercury is not in Taurus for very long. It's because it's moving so fast. So it's going to speed through and be in Gemini in the end of May. So you only have a couple of weeks of Mercury and Taurus here, but it can be good. So that's it we have for this week. Very, very softer week, very more subtler influences. I just think we're still kind of progressing. These are like the aftershocks of the Mars Pluto opposition with this aspect to Pluto and Pluto stationing retrograde. So we are still living through the aftershocks of all the things that have happened and deciding if this is something that we want to continue or not, or maybe we backtrack and review it. So that's all I have for this week. If you want more content from us and see us, you can follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Two Girls Talk Transits. You can also follow us on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe. Be posting that video on there. Sometimes we're not the best at keeping up with that, but I'm working on it. And of course, if you want a reading from either Kaleigh and I, both of us offer astrology readings. I do the more traditional birth chart and predictive readings. So I like looking at your head or looking at certain issues that you're dealing with. Kaleigh also offers birth chart readings from a more psychological perspective and therapeutic perspective, as well as Kaleigh really loves astrocartography readings, which is about locational astrology and where you are in the world. So if you're looking to move or change places or just find what's a really good place for you to be, you should check out an astrocartography reading with Kaleigh. And all of that is linked in our show notes where you can find us and book with us. So be sure to check that out. Right. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you next time.